So my lesson is for seventh class. And for my context, I said that the students have been reading The Hunger Games. We're using The Hunger Games as a mentor text to go along with the unit's theme of survival. I'm trying to teach narrative writing to the students. So during our previous class, we discussed misplaced and dangling modifiers. Today, we're going to be looking at the importance of sentence structure, and primarily the purpose of this lesson is to examine the way the author uses sentence variation to bring meaning to readers, and how to correctly use participle phrases and clauses in a sentence. The lesson that follows is going to examine the use of active and passive voice. So I use reading, writing, and language standards. So the language standard that I focused on, because this is a lesson on grammar, I focused on the language 7.1. It says demonstrate command of the conventions of standard English grammar and usage when writing or speaking. Part A says to explain the function of phrases and clauses. Part B says to choose among simple, compound, complex, and compound complex sentences to single differing relationships among ideas. And then part C says to place phrases and clauses within a sentence, recognizing and correcting misplaced and dangling modifiers. So each part of my lesson tried to focus on each part of Standard 7.1. So for my first objective, it reads, the student will correct misplaced and dangling modifiers in a sample sentence. So in order to do this, I chose to fulfill the reading standard 7.4, and then the language 7.1c. The 7.1c is obviously the one that speaks of dangling and misplaced modifiers. The reading standard for 7.4 reads, is to determine the meaning of words and phrases as they are used in a text, including figurative, connotative, and technical meanings. Analyze the impact of a specific word choice on meaning and tone. This is a bell work assignment. I'm going to break students into groups of 4. Each group is going to have a sentence that's already spelled out onto note cards. There's only going to be one word per note card, and the note cards are going to make up a sentence. And then so the sentences are going to have misplaced and dangling modifiers, and then the students are going to attempt to rearrange the note cards in order to correct the misplaced or dangling modifier. Then I'm going to let each group share their results. The groups that had a misplaced modifier would just be able to simply, rearrange the sentence in order to correct it. But I want the students that had the dangling modifier to realize that in order to fix the sentence, they're going to have to add words. So they're not just going to be able to simply rearrange the sentence in order to fix it like their other peers are. I want students to realize this so they're aware of this and they don't make the same mistakes whenever they try to use participle phrases or clauses, because I think that's one reason why our students are afraid to use these more complex sentences, because they're afraid to make these types of mistakes. And then so after this bell work activity, we're going to move on to the lesson. My second objective states that the student will analyze sentence structure using a model text. So I'm going to get the students to silently read the first chapter of The Hunger Games. And then while they read, they're going to identify at least one example of a simple, compound complex, and compound complex sentence. And they're going to identify these sentences using different colored markers. So they're going to identify just at least one sentence out of the entire chapter that's, they're going to identify just, at least one simple, one compound, one complex sentence, and one compound complex sentence. And I just want them to do that so I understand that they know they can identify these different types of sentences. So after the student finishes reading the first chapter, I'm going to break students into groups and allow students to share their findings with each other. And then after that, I'm going to discuss with the students why they think that the author uses a variety of sentences in the narrative. I want them to realize that, obviously this author is a well-skilled author, and she's not just using simple sentences, she's using a variety of sentences. I want students to realize that in their own writing, they need to do the same. And then so I'm going to ask the following questions. Would the text have the same effect if the author only used simple sentences? Why do you think the author uses a variety of sentences when writing? And then so this part of the lesson is going to cover standards, reading standards, the 7.4 and 7.5, and then the language standard for 7.1, because it's going to be dealing with the compound complex sentences and also clauses and participle phrases, because they're going to be identifying these different types of sentences, and they're going to include participle phrases and clauses. And then so the final part of the lesson, my objective for it, this is my third and last objective. It says that the student will create sentences using participle phrases and clauses. So after we've looked at these different types of sentences, we've discussed participle phrases and clauses, I want students to try to do it themselves. I'm going to do a little writing activity to get students to do this. I'm going to say it's going to make them think of a time that they were in a near-death experience. This is going to go along with the whole survival theme that we're doing here. If they've never been through a near-death experience, they can just make up an example, or they can use an example from the Hunger Games that they just read, so there'll be plenty of examples from that. And then the teacher is just going to ask students how they felt during their near-death experience. And then I'm going to record the responses on a whiteboard, and I'm just going to, while they're describing how they would feel in a near-death experience, if they use any ing words, I'm going to write that down on the whiteboard. And then I'm going to explain that they should use these ing words to create a author does in the Hunger Games. So I'm trying to teach them how they can use a participle phrase to write a sentence. And then I'm just going to discuss participle phrases, and then I'm going to get students to give an example of a complex sentence from the Hunger Games. So for the closure, I'm going to, after I've discussed participle phrases and complex sentences, I'm going to require students to write a short narrative about their near-death experience using one sentence with a participle phrase. And also a sentence that has an independent and dependent clause. So I'm going to get them to practice writing participle phrases and sentences with clauses. If they've never had, like I said, if they never had a near-death experience, they can just make up one, or they can just recall one from the Hunger Games. So they're going to be working on this informal writing assignment until the end of class. They probably won't get finished with this, so we'll just finish that up during our next lesson. But I just want to introduce that assignment at the very end of class. And that is my lesson plan.